So what if I told you that the hardest working, most proactive, most, hyper-vigilant investors in the world are basically mathematically guaranteed to lose?
Lose to someone who is literally just taking a nap. Yeah.
Right. Welcome to today's deep dive. If you're joining us, you are probably someone who really wants to understand how massive, seemingly complex systems actually work under the hood.
You want the raw mechanics, but you absolutely do not want to be bogged down by like a giant wall of impenetrable Wall Street jargon.
Exactly. And that is completely our mission today. We are going to demystify the fundamental bare metal mechanics of the stock market.
But more importantly, I think, we are going to explore this really fascinating psychological trap.
Yeah, we're going to discover why our own deeply ingrained, very human instincts often lead us incredibly astray when it comes to building wealth.
The psychology is really what makes this so compelling.
Hmm.
We're dealing with a cognitive blind spot that is so pervasive
It really is.
and so powerful that it has essentially spawned an entire multi-billion-dollar financial industry built entirely around exploiting it.
It's wild. To guide us through this maze, we have a phenomenal stack of sources today. We are working with an excerpt from a book that opens with a piece titled A Parable, The Gottschalks Family.
Right, which originally stems from a story told by the legendary Warren Buffett. He wrote this back in his 2005 Berkshire Hathaway annual report.
But we aren't just looking at folksy parables today. We are anchoring this story with some incredibly hard-hitting, real-world commentary.
Yeah, from heavyweights at Harvard and Princeton who unpack the absolute immovable mathematics behind Buffett's story.
And the central mystery we are going to be untangling for you today is this: how did a perfectly harmonious, phenomenally wealthy family manage to accidentally shrink their own pie?
Shrink it from 100% down to just 60%.
And why is the entire modern financial industry basically built on encouraging you to make the exact same mistake?
Okay, let's unpack this. So before we can properly diagnose how things go so terribly wrong for the Gottschalks family, we really have to establish their baseline.
We need to look at the utopia they initially created.
Exactly, because it represents the absolute mathematical ideal of investing.
The setup for the Gottschalks family is practically a financial fairy tale. Picture a massively wealthy family tree.
Over the generations, they have grown to include thousands of brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, and cousins.
And here is the foundational premise, which is so important. As a collective unit, this single family owns 100% of every single stock in the United States.
Which is just an incredibly elegant thought experiment.
Mm.
By owning 100% of U.S. equities, the Gottschalks family essentially owns corporate America in its entirety.
Right. Every factory, every tech startup.
Every grocery store chain, every pharmaceutical lab, I mean, they own the whole board.
And because they own the whole board, each year they reap 100% of the rewards of that massive investment.
What this means mechanically is that they get all of the earnings growth generated by those thousands of corporations.
And they get all of the dividends that those corporations distribute. Every single family member grows wealthier at the exact same pace.
It is completely harmonious. Their investment just sits there, compounding over the decades, creating enormous, staggering wealth.
They're playing what is referred to here as a winner's game.
We should really pause and dissect the mechanics of that 100% ownership, actually.
Yeah, let's do that. Because it is the crucial baseline for everything that follows.
Right. What is being described here is the pure, unadulterated distillation of capitalism's growth engine.
Because there is zero friction in this system.
There are no intermediaries. When a major telecommunications company makes a profit and pays a dividend, that money flows directly and unimpeded into the collective pockets of the Gottschalks family.
And when a software company decides to reinvest its earnings to build, like, a new data center and grow its market share, the underlying value of the Gottschalks family's shares increases proportionally.
Exactly. There is no leakage.
I want to make sure I'm fully visualizing this. Let me give an ELI 5 analogy here.
Sure, go ahead.
It's like owning the only apple orchard in town. You have this massive family, and you all co-own the entire orchard.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
You don't need to trade apples with your sister. You don't need to negotiate with your uncle over who gets the rights to the north-facing branches.
Right. You just collectively wait for the trees to grow, the seasons to change, and you collect the harvest together.
The trees are doing all the actual labor. You just own the dirt they are planted in.
That orchard analogy captures the essence perfectly, I think. The orchard is going to produce what the orchard is going to produce based on the sun, the rain, and the soil.
Shuffling the paper deeds to the individual trees around among the different family members does not miraculously create more apples.
No, not at all. The aggregate yield of the orchard is a fixed reality in any given season.
There's also this brilliant little footnote in the source material that adds another layer to this perfection.
Oh, about the new issues.
Yeah. To keep this 100% ownership perfectly intact, the Gautrox family also purchases all the new public offerings of securities that are issued each year.
So if we go back to the orchard, if a new sapling sprouts up, or someone discovers a new type of apple tree and brings it to town, the family immediately buys it.
They add it to the collective pool. They aren't just holding the old companies.
Right. As the economy expands and new companies go public through IPOs, the family buys those up too,
They remain at all times the entire market.
which ensures they never dilute their exposure to the overall growth of the economy. And we have to emphasize exactly why this system is flawless.
It works because it is perfectly passive,
Right.
yet perfectly productive.
Think about what is actually happening out in the real world while the Gautrox family does absolutely nothing.
Corporate America is going to work every single day.
You have millions of employees waking up, drinking their coffee, and innovating. You have thousands of CEOs strategizing.
You have logistics networks moving goods across the country. All of that immense human effort is baking a massive pie of wealth.
The Gautrox family doesn't have to manage the factory floor or invent the next microchip. They just hold the shares.
It is the absolute magic of compounding capital over long horizons without a single drop of friction.
But if it's this simple, and this beautifully harmonious, human nature practically dictates that the utopia is doomed. Right?
Oh, totally. You cannot have thousands of cousins just sitting quietly while a mountain of gold slowly piles up in front of them.
Someone is going to get bored.
Or, more likely, someone is going to look across the Thanksgiving dinner table, look at their cousin, and think, well, I am definitively smarter than you.
And I should have a larger pile of gold than you.
Exactly.
And that psychological crack is exactly where the perfection shatters. The instinct to act, to optimize, to somehow beat the system or outmaneuver our peers is deeply, fundamentally ingrained in the human animal.
And the narrative beautifully illustrates how that very natural instinct is subsequently weaponized against the family's wealth.
Enter the catalysts of chaos.
Yes, we are introduced to these characters called the helpers. They are described as fast-talking, and they arrive on the scene with a very seductive pitch.
They pull aside some of the quote-unquote smart Gautrox cousins and persuade them that they can actually earn a larger share of the overall wealth than their relatives.
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology that the helpers are exploiting. Look at how we are conditioned to operate in almost every other area of human endeavor.
Right. In life, taking active steps, working harder, and outsmarting the competition almost always leads to success.
If you are a surgeon, studying new techniques and performing more surgeries makes you a better, more successful surgeon.
If you are an athlete, training more actively and aggressively makes you faster than the person next to you.
We are deeply conditioned from childhood to believe that motion equals progress.
And that physical or mental activity yields superior results.
But the stock market isn't a foot race, and it definitely isn't a surgery.
No, it is a completely different paradigm. In the context of the aggregate stock market, this application of active effort is a profound paradox.
Because remember, the pie itself isn't getting any bigger just because you are trying harder.
The corporate earnings of the United States are still the exact same corporate earnings.
The helpers are simply convincing these specific cousins that by applying effort, they can carve out a bigger slice of the existing pie.
Entirely at the expense of their aunts, uncles, and other cousins.
So how do these fast-talking helpers actually execute this?
Well, they convince these smart cousins to sell their shares in certain companies to other family members, and in return, buy shares of other companies from them.
Essentially, sell your tech stocks to Uncle Bob and buy Uncle Bob's healthcare stocks.
And of course, the helpers are more than happy to facilitate all this moving around. They act as the brokers.
They handle all the complicated transactions, the paperwork, the matching of buyers and sellers.
And for their incredibly kind services, they take a commission.
And this is the moment the mathematics turn against the family.
To the shock of the Gautrox family, after this trading begins, their total aggregate family wealth starts growing at a slower pace.
The mathematics of this shrinking pie are absolute. Remember, our baseline, the corporations, the underlying U.S. industry, they are baking the exact same amount of wealth.
The dividends paid out by those companies are exactly the same. The earnings they reinvested into new factories are exactly the same.
But the net return to the owners drops.
Precisely. Because the helpers are now consuming a slice right off the top.
Every single time a share changes hands from one cousin to another, the broker takes a small piece of the transaction.
The gross return of the market remains 100%, but the net return to the Gottschalks family begins to actively decline.
Purely because of the frictional drag of those commissions.
Yeah.
Wait, before we move on, I want to play audience surrogate here for a second and ask for an ELI5 breakdown of the mechanics.
Sure, let's make it make sense.
Let's go back to my orchard metaphor. If I'm holding an apple and my cousin is holding a pear, and we decide we want to swap, why does the act of swapping suddenly destroy part of our food supply?
Because you aren't just handing the apple directly to your cousin, you are using a helper to facilitate the trade.
Right.
So you hand your apple to the helper takes a bite out of your apple as a fee for their service.
Oh,
Then they take your cousin's pear, they take a bite out of the pear, and then they hand you the partially eaten pear and hand your cousin the partially eaten apple.
you both feel like you made a strategic move, but the total caloric value of the fruit between the two of you has permanently decreased.
The helper walked away with the calories.
Yeah.
In financial terms, this is the bid-ask spread and the explicit broker commission. Every single trade incurs a toll.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. But as I was reviewing the source material, I noticed the author zeroes in on something else that makes this even worse.
It is not just the broker commissions eating away at the pie.
Right. The introduction of the helpers triggers the introduction of new taxes.
The family has always paid taxes on their dividends. I mean, that's standard. That's just part of the baseline.
But now, purely because they are swapping stocks back and forth, they are suddenly generating capital gains taxes.
It is a second highly corrosive layer of wealth destruction.
So explain capital gains to me in this context. If I'm just holding a stock that goes up over 10 years, I'm making money on paper.
Right.
But why does the act of handing it to my cousin suddenly trigger a tax penalty from the government?
So the government tax code is structured to tax realized gains. If you own a stock and it goes up in value, that is an unrealized gain. It's on paper.
You haven't actually locked in the profit.
Exactly. But the moment you sell that stock to your cousin, even if you immediately use that cash to buy a different stock, you have realized that gain.
You have turned paper wealth into actual currency for a split second.
And the moment you do that, the government steps in and claims a percentage of that profit.
So you have the helpers taking a bite for the transaction fee and the government taking a massive bite for the capital gain tax, all because you decided you didn't want to just sit still.
The family is literally volunteering to be taxed more just for the privilege of shuffling their ownership papers around.
That is the tragic irony of the situation. Their desire to be proactive is entirely self-defeating.
If you're listening to this and you've ever checked your retirement account on a brokerage app, you have probably seen that bright, shiny Trade Now button.
Or maybe you've gotten a notification that a certain stock is trending.
That button, that notification, that is the modern-day helper.
It is frictionless to click it, but the math working against you behind the scenes is exactly what we are describing here.
Which brings us to the next, arguably more devastating phase of this parable.
Logically, you would think that once the smart cousins realize their wealth growth has measurably slowed down, they would retreat.
They would look at their spreadsheets, see the bite marks from the commissions and the taxes, and say, okay, we ran the experiment, it was a mathematical failure, let's go back to doing absolutely nothing.
But that is rarely how human beings operate, especially when pride and money are involved.
Once we commit to a mistake, and once we publicly declare to our family that we are the smart ones, we don't retreat. We double down.
It is the absolute textbook definition of the sunk cost fallacy.
And the narrative tracks this behavioral flaw perfectly. The smart cousins quickly realize that their grand plan actually diminished their rate of growth.
They recognize that their foray into active stock picking was a failure.
But their conclusion isn't to stop stock picking. Their conclusion is that they personally just weren't skilled enough at it.
And therefore, they need to hire professional assistants to pick the right stocks for them.
So they hire stock picking experts, more helpers.
And these new helpers are money managers, who, of course, do not work for free.
They charge entirely new, entirely separate fees for their services.
They usually take a percentage of the total assets they are managing year in and year out, regardless of whether they actually make you any money.
So the cousins wait a year. They appraise their wealth. And shocker, the family share of the pie has diminished even further.
But the mechanism of destruction actually accelerates here, and it's vital to understand why.
The text explicitly points out that to make matters worse, these newly hired managers feel psychologically and professionally compelled to earn their keep.
Think about the institutional pressure here. If you are paying a money manager a hefty 1 or 2% fee on millions of dollars, that manager cannot just sit at their desk, buy the whole market, and do nothing.
If they did that, you would fire them and just hold the market yourself. They have to prove they were working for you. They have to demonstrate their expertise.
And how do they demonstrate expertise? By doing things, by moving the apples around,
The source tells us they trade the family stocks at feverish levels of activity.
which is just throwing gasoline on a raging fire.
Because not only is the family now paying the money manager their overarching management fee, but that manager's feverish, frantic trading is generating exponential amounts of new brokerage commissions for the first set of helpers.
And every single time they frantically swap a tech stock for a bank stock, they're running up the capital gains tax bill to unprecedented, staggering heights.
The friction isn't just adding up, it is compounding.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because even after seeing the second layer of failure, they still don't stop.
The cousins look at this new degraded baseline and they say, well, we failed to pick good stocks ourselves.
And then we clearly failed to pick the right managers who could pick good stocks.
What on earth shall we do? Undeterred by two colossal, very expensive failures, they decide to hire still more helpers.
We have now reached the third layer of intermediation.
Yes. They go out and they retain the absolute best investment consultants and elite financial planners they can find.
And what is the job of these consultants? To advise the family on how to select the right managers, who will then supposedly pick the right stocks executed by the brokers.
And the consultants, as the original text dryly notes, arrive with a very simple promise.
They assure the family, just pay us a fee for our services and all will be well.
This is what we call layered intermediation.
Let me translate that so we don't get lost in the jargon. Layered intermediation essentially means a middleman hiring a middleman who hires a middleman.
Exactly. You have a cascading ecosystem of costs. You have the underlying asset at the bottom, the actual corporate earnings being generated by real people working at real companies.
Then you have a broker taking a cut to execute a trade.
Then you have a money manager taking a cut to tell the broker what to trade.
Then you have a consultant taking a cut to tell the family which money manager to hire.
Each subsequent layer requires a hefty fee, and crucially, each layer justifies its own continued existence through hyperactivity.
And with those added compounding costs, the family share of the pie absolutely tumbles. We are told it dwindles all the way down to just 60%.
Think about the sheer magnitude of that destruction for a second. We went from 100% perfect, frictionless wealth retention down to 60%.
40% of the entire wealth generated by the U.S. economy, wealth that mathematically and rightfully belonged to the owners of those corporations, has been siphoned off.
It didn't vanish into thin air. It was actively extracted by intermediaries, brokers, consultants, and unnecessary taxes generated by frantic motion.
It is a wealth transfer on an epic scale, from the owners of capital to the managers of capital.
It is exasperating to even think about. Imagine this in any other context.
Why is it that when we fail at something, our instinct is to hire 3 more layers of people to fix it, rather than just stopping the behavior that is causing the problem in the first place?
If I have a terrible headache because I am repeatedly hitting myself on the forehead with a hammer, my solution should not be to hire a hammer-swinging consultant to advise me on better angles.
And then hire a pain management doctor to prescribe me pills. The solution is to drop the hammer.
But dropping the hammer requires a profound psychological admission. You have to admit that your activity, your cleverness, and your effort were actually the source of the destruction.
And when an entire multi-billion-dollar financial industry is built around selling you different, shinier types of hammers, it is very, very hard to hear the quiet, boring message that you should just put the tools down and walk away.
Which brings us to the ultimate moment of reckoning for the Gottschalks family.
They have finally hit rock bottom at the 60% figure. They are alarmed, their wealth is bleeding out, and they sit down for a massive family intervention to take stock of the events that have transpired since those first smart cousins started trying to outsmart each other.
And finally, a new character steps in. The voice of reason.
The sage old uncle.
Yes, the wise old uncle softly responds to the family's panic. He doesn't yell. He just points out a fundamental, inescapable mathematical truth.
All that money they have been paying to the helpers, the brokers, the managers, the consultants.
And all those unnecessary extra capital gains taxes they are paying to the government.
are coming directly out of the family's total earnings and dividends.
It isn't coming from some magical outside source.
Yeah.
It is their own money being drained.
And his advice to the family is absolute, brutal, and uncompromising. He says, go back to square one and do so immediately.
Get rid of all your brokers, fire all your money managers, dismiss all your consultants.
He tells them to return to their original, passive but hyper-productive strategy. He says, just hold all the stocks of corporate America and stand pat. Do not move.
And then the text drops the grand reveal, the punchline of the whole parable. That is exactly what an index fund does.
It is a brilliant, demystifying unmasking of the concept. For a lot of people, an index fund sounds like just another complex piece of financial engineering.
But it isn't. It is simply the digital, automated equivalent of the sage-old uncle's advice.
Let's break that down mechanically because it's vital. How exactly does an index fund buy the entire market without incurring the exact same trading fees and taxes that the helpers charge?
If an index fund owns everything, isn't it also trading?
Yeah, how does that work?
The secret is in the passivity. An index fund, like one that tracks the S&P 500, simply buys the 500 largest companies in the U.S. and holds them.
It doesn't try to guess which of those 500 will do best next month.
It just holds them in proportion to their size. Because it isn't constantly trying to outsmart the market, its turnover, the rate at which it sells old stocks and buys new ones, is incredibly low.
It only really trades when a company gets so small it drops out of the top 500, or a new company gets big enough to enter.
So because it isn't frantically moving the apples around every day, it doesn't incur the broker fees.
And because it isn't realizing those gains by constantly selling, it defers the capital gains taxes indefinitely.
It is a mechanism designed to hold all the stocks, systematically avoid the helpers, completely eliminate the feverish trading, and retain as close to 100% of the pie as humanly possible.
The author also brings in a fantastic quote from Warren Buffett here to solidify the concept.
Buffett adds what he cheekily calls a fourth law to Sir Isaac Newton's 3 laws of motion.
Buffett says, for investors as a whole, returns decrease as motion increases.
Let that sink in for a second. Returns decrease as motion increases.
That feels like the crux of the entire issue.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
The underlying text explicitly states that this parable reflects a profound, unresolvable conflict of interest between those who work in the investment business and those who actually invest their money.
You have two completely opposed paths to wealth. Think about the way to wealth for the helpers.
If you are a brokerage institution, a money manager, or a consultant, your revenue model is entirely dependent on persuading your clients, don't just stand there. Do something.
Trade this hot new stock, rotate into this new mutual fund, shift your portfolio to this new asset class.
Every single action generates a fee, a commission, or a consultation charge.
But the way to wealth for the client, for you listening to this right now, is to follow the exact diametric opposite maxim.
Don't do something, just stand there.
Because standing there means zero motion. Zero motion means zero friction.
And zero friction means you achieve the maximum possible retention of the returns the underlying businesses are actually out there generating.
Trying to quote-unquote beat the market through activity is, mathematically speaking, a loser's game for the public at large.
Because of the inescapable math of the aggregate, it is mathematically impossible for investors as a whole to beat the market, because investors as a whole are the market.
If the market returns 10% in a year, all investors combined earned exactly 10% before fees.
But once you subtract the intermediation costs, the 2% management fees, the broker commissions, the taxes, the active investors must inherently fall below that 10%.
So what does this all mean for you? It means that common sense indexing reduces the costs of financial intermediation to the absolute bare bones minimum.
The rule is perfectly inverse. The higher the level of investment activity you engage in, the greater the cost of intermediation and taxes, and the less the net return you actually get to keep.
Conversely, the lower the costs you incur by standing still, the higher the rewards you reap.
When a massive global business is conducted in a way that directly mathematically defies the best interests of its clients in the aggregate, it is only a matter of time until those clients awaken to the reality of the math.
And that awakening is the massive, ongoing global shift toward passive index funds.
Now, if you are listening to this, you might have a nagging bit of skepticism.
You might be thinking, okay, the Gottschalk's parable is a great story. The math makes logical sense on paper. But it's just a theoretical story about cousins and apples.
Does this actually play out in the high-stakes, cutthroat, real world of institutional finance?
What happens when we aren't talking about my retirement account, but we are talking about billions of dollars managed by the smartest people in the room?
And our source material anticipates that exact skepticism. It brings in some absolute heavyweights to validate the math.
And we cannot overstate the credentials of the voices being brought in here. These are not fringe bloggers.
These are individuals who have operated at the very absolute pinnacle of the active management world and Ivy League academia.
Right. If you want to see this friction play out in the real world, look no further than Harvard University.
The text introduces us to Jack R. Meyer. We need to establish exactly who this guy is because his resume is staggeringly impressive.
He is the former president of the Harvard Management Company. He is described in the financial world as a remarkably successful wizard.
Why? Because during his tenure, he tripled the Harvard University Endowment Fund. He took it from $8 billion to $27 billion.
If anyone on planet Earth knows how elite institutional money is managed, it is Jack Meyer.
Managing a $27 billion endowment gives you an unparalleled, God's-eye view of the entire global financial ecosystem.
You aren't just reading about money managers, you are being actively pitched by every single elite manager, every hedge fund, every consultant, every helper in the world.
They all want a piece of Harvard's billions.
And after dealing with the absolute top tier of the financial industry for years, what does the guy who oversaw $27 billion have to say about the investment business?
The text quotes an explosive 2004 interview he did with Businessweek. His exact, unvarnished words, "The investment business is a giant scam."
That is a staggering, monumental quote from someone in his position.
A giant scam.
Mm.
He doesn't mince words. He doesn't dress it up in polite Wall Street speak.
He goes on to unpack exactly why. He says most people think they can find managers who can outperform, but most people are wrong.
I will say that 85 to 90% of managers fail to match their benchmarks.
And then he provides the exact same fundamental mathematical reasoning we just saw the sage-old uncle use in the parable.
Meyer says because managers have fees and incur transaction costs, you know that in the aggregate they are deleting value.
This raises an incredibly important question, though. Think about the cognitive dissonance here.
Why, if someone who managed $27 billion for Harvard unequivocally calls the entire industry a giant scam, do millions of people and thousands of institutions still participate in it?
Because the helpers are very, very good at their jobs. The illusion of advantage is intoxicating.
Everyone thinks they are the exception. Everyone thinks they can find the 10% of managers who do beat the benchmark.
Completely ignoring that identifying that 10% in advance is statistically near impossible.
That is the crux of it. Meyer's use of the word scam is so powerful not because he is accusing the industry of illegal fraud. They aren't stealing the money out of the vault in the dead of night.
But they are systematically, relentlessly selling a mathematical impossibility to the public.
They're selling the idea that you can consistently outsmart the aggregate market without the friction dragging you down.
When Meyer was asked what normal private investors should learn from Harvard's approach, his advice is remarkably simple and mirrors our parable perfectly.
What does a Harvard wizard tell you to do? He says first, get diversified. Own the whole orchard.
Second, keep your fees low by aggressively avoiding hyped-up, expensive, actively managed funds in favor of low-cost index funds.
And finally, invest for the long term. He concludes that investors should simply have index funds to keep their fees low and their taxes down.
His final thought on the matter, no doubt about it.
No doubt about it. Coming from the apex of institutional finance, that is as definitive a conclusion as you could possibly get.
But the exploration doesn't stop there. We are given a second heavyweight voice to really hammer the mathematical reality home.
We hear from Princeton University professor Burton G. Malkiel, who wrote an incredibly famous seminal book on finance called A Random Walk Down Wall Street.
Malkiel approaches this from a slightly different angle. He isn't an institutional operator fighting off hedge fund pitches like Meyer.
He approaches this from the perspective of pure, unassailable academic mathematics.
Right. His tone is definitely less contentious than Meyer shouting that it's a giant scam. But Malkiel's math is just as devastating to the helpers.
He states, based on long-term historical data, that index funds have regularly produced annual rates of return exceeding those of active managers by close to 2 percentage points.
We need to contextualize what 2 percentage points actually means, because to a casual observer, 2% sounds tiny. It sounds like a rounding error.
But when you are compounding money over 30 or 40 years, like the Gottschalk's family timeline or your own retirement timeline, a 2% annual drag is catastrophic.
Over 30 years, an investment growing at 8% compared to 10% means you could literally end up with half as much total wealth.
It is the difference between retiring comfortably and running out of money in your 70s. It is a massive structural drain on your life's work.
And Malkiel explains exactly why this underperformance isn't just bad luck, but a mathematical certainty.
He says, active management as a whole cannot achieve gross returns exceeding the market as a whole, and therefore they must, on average, underperform the indexes by the amount of these expense and transaction costs.
That is the immovable object in the room. The logic is impenetrable.
Think of it this way. The market is not some abstract entity. It is simply the sum total of all investors participating in it.
Therefore, all active managers, when combined together, are the market.
If they, in aggregate, return the market average before they charge their fees, they must inherently, unavoidably fall below the market average after you subtract their large advisory fees and the frictional costs of their substantial portfolio turnover.
Malkiel concludes that empirical experience conclusively shows index fund buyers will always exceed the results of the typical fund manager.
He calls the index fund a sensible, serviceable method for obtaining the market's rate of return with absolutely no effort and minimal expense.
I love the contrast in delivery between Meyer and Malkiel here. You have Meyer coming in hot from the trenches of Harvard, practically flipping the table and shouting, "It's a giant scam."
And then you have Malkiel standing at a chalkboard in Princeton, adjusting his glasses, and calmly stating it is mathematically certain to underperform due to transaction costs.
But for you listening to this, whether the truth is delivered with fiery institutional exasperation or with cold academic restraint, the conclusion is completely identical.
The inescapable conclusion is that the friction of intermediation destroys wealth. It is an unavoidable law of financial physics.
So let's synthesize this journey we've been on today. We started with the theoretical Gottschalk's family, living in a perfect utopia of 100% wealth retention.
We watched them descend into the chaos of active stock picking, driven by the deeply human illusion that motion equals progress.
We saw their hard-earned wealth systematically drained by fast-talking brokers, decimated by hyperactive money managers, and further diluted by useless consultants.
All while capital gains taxes ate away whatever scraps were left.
We watched their share of the American economic pie plummet from 100% to a tragic 60%.
And we saw how the only real solution, the ultimate foolproof defense against the sprawling ecosystem of helpers, was to go back to square one. Standing pat, doing nothing, indexing.
Why does this matter to you? Why should you care about a theoretical family of cousins or the musings of a Harvard endowment manager?
Because right now, today, you are living in a world that is constantly screaming at you to act.
Your phone buzzes with alerts to trade, algorithms feed you advertisements promising the next big stock pick, and an entire multi-billion-dollar industry is begging you to hire their experts so you can optimize your wealth.
What this deep dive reveals is that in the face of all that noise, doing absolutely nothing, just standing there and owning the whole market passively, is actually the most aggressive, most successful, most radically effective strategy you can employ for your financial future.
It truly is a radical act of financial self-preservation to recognize the game, look at the helpers, and refuse to play.
It really is. And honestly, it leaves me with a thought that extends way beyond just the stock market or your retirement account.
The principles we explored today definitively prove that in finance, returns decrease as motion increases purely due to the friction of the helpers taking their cut.
It makes you wonder, where else in your life are helpers convincing you to create unnecessary motion?
Are we paying a hidden tax in our careers by constantly job hopping for incremental gains?
Are we paying a friction tax in our relationships by constantly searching for an optimized partner?
Or even in our attention spans, scrolling frantically for the next piece of content simply because we are deeply afraid to just stand there and be present.
Sometimes the most powerful, most profitable way to run the machine of your life is to just stop throwing sand in the gears, put the hammer down, and let it run.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We will catch you next time.